Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending tonight's 12th annual film screening event. My name is Jackie Saran, and I am the Remedial Action Plan Coordinator for the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup. The DRCC is a partnership that includes all three levels of government: industry, scientists, the Conservation Authority, environmental organizations, and interested dedicated citizens like yourselves that work together to restore, enhance, and protect the Detroit River ecosystem. The Detroit River was listed as an area of concern in 1987 due to degraded water quality, loss of fish and wildlife habitat, and chemical contamination of the river. Over the last 30 years, we've made great progress and enormous strides and invested millions of dollars to return the Detroit River to a much healthier ecosystem for all of us. The DRCC partners implement projects ranging from habitat restoration, like constructing spawning reefs, to monitoring wildlife for effects of chemical contamination, and public education about the river, like tonight's film screening. Our ultimate goal is to remove the Detroit River from the list of Great Lakes areas of concern, and we're making good progress. We expect that the Canadian side of the Detroit River will be removed from the list of areas of concern over the next few years. If you'd like to know more information about the Detroit River or any of the initiatives that you see tonight, please visit our website at detroitriver.ca. Many of you likely already receive our e-newsletter, but if you don't and would like to, please make sure to sign up, and you can do so on our website. It's the best way to find out about our upcoming events. This year for our film screening, we're pleased to bring you Ecohighway. Ecohighway is a film about the actions, challenges, and lessons learned in protecting species at risk in the parkway. In the construction of the Gray Parkway. There are more than 500 plant and animal species at risk in Canada. In the Essex region, there are more than 240 provincially or federally rare species of plants and animals that have been recorded. Ecohighway is a great local documentary that shows the care that was taken to reduce the impact of construction on species at risk during the Gray Parkway construction. And so by incorporating species at risk protection and prairie restoration in the construction of the parkway, a natural corridor within the Detroit River watershed was created that plants, animals, and humans can use and enjoy. Before we begin, special thanks are owed to Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks for helping make this event possible. I would also like to thank our panel members, Dan Lebedek, Russ Jones, and Susan Snyder, for agreeing to participate in the discussion after the film. The film runs about a half an hour in length, and after that, we'll bring the panelists on screen to start an interactive discussion about the film, and the panelists will speak a bit about their involvement in the Parkway project. So I put a link to the panelists' full bios in the chat or comment box, but to give you a taste of what's to come and to prime you to think of some challenging questions during the movie tonight for our panelists, we're pleased to welcome Dan Lebedek, IRCA's biologist and ecologist who worked closely with the province on the Parkway project. We're also pleased to welcome Russ Jones, one of the lead field biologists on the Parkway project from 2011 to 2018. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Susan Snyder, senior plant ecologist at Wood Environment and Infrastructure. Susan was a co-author on the award-winning landscape restoration plan for the Gray Parkway and continues to provide advice on long-term habitat management. If you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat in YouTube or the comment section on Facebook, and we will do our best to address them during the panel portion of the evening. And so with that, it's my pleasure to get the show started. Thanks so much for coming, and please enjoy Ecohighway.
In 2004, the governments of the United States and Canada announced the construction of a new border crossing between Detroit and Windsor, a major expansion to a crossing that already handled nearly a third of Canada-US trade. The first step would be an 11-kilometer multi-lane access road to the new International Gateway. The Right Honorable Gray Parkway would bisect 3 local communities and parts of the Prairie complex, one of the most endangered vegetation communities on Earth. home to over 4,000 species of plants and animals, many of them rare and critically endangered. Approval under both the Ontario and Canadian Environmental Assessment Acts required the project to protect the species at risk and to preserve and enhance the prairie ecosystem. To be successful, construction of the parkway would have to enrich human and natural environments rather than erode them. Many people doubted this could be done. A few saw it as an opportunity for learning. Either way, the stakes were high.
The stakes are extremely high. The impacts you could have on the number of rare species and the amount of significance these areas have, is dramatic. So we had to make sure that this project was properly vetted so that we had no negative impact on all of those rare things. It's an extremely tall order to fill. This is extremely huge, and the amount of land area we are affecting is dramatic.
This is within Walpole Island's traditional territory. So this area has a lot of historic meaning and importance to the First Nation. Even just that alone, we would be involved in this project. The extra added thing that makes this really unique is that this particular area next to the Ojibwe Prairie complex is one of the last large remaining tallgrass prairie sites in the country. And the other major one is Walpole Island. So, we're connected here in history, but also in the ecosystem itself.
It's an opportunity to not only discover a lot of new things about these species that no one knew anything about, it's an opportunity to see and test whether you can relocate populations and how do they do after that. This is a huge question right now with climate change.
There was a lot of skepticism at the very beginning of this project from members of the general public, especially those that may be in the environmental realm, local naturalists, environmentalists, very concerned about something this huge, potentially impacting something so significant.
A lot was at stake, and there was a lot of pressure to get it right. Governments, First Nations, industry, and environmental groups had to find common ground and work together. Construction of the parkway posed a direct threat to the survival of some species at risk, in particular the eastern fox snake, a species that was already endangered in this part of Ontario. At the same time, construction provided an opportunity to create new habitat in a residential area that was being decommissioned.
Where we're standing used to be a neighborhood full of about 25 houses, and it was called Redox Street. And Redox Street had houses like you do on any street, with backyards and front yards. But unlike any other place, they had snakes. They had fox snakes.
To be quite honest, many of us were quite surprised to what extent these snakes live in and amongst a human environment. Radio tracking snakes into people's attics, in their pool sheds, in these very urbanized environments is not typical for most snake species, but is certainly the case in Windsor.
The houses, well, we had to take them apart and we had to demolish them, but we actually put the majority of the material to use already. We didn't remove it. We simply imploded the basements on themselves and then created those underground cavities, the hibernacula, for the animals to use. By the way, they're not just used by fox snakes, they're used by all kinds of critters. And in that habitat, we've created many facets that they require in order to thrive. We've created hibernacula, which are large places for them to get underground and stay safe for the winter during the freezing months. We've created nesting boxes, so we've just given them a hedged bet on whether or not they lay their eggs, they'll be able to successfully hatch.
Through radio telemetry studies, we've confirmed that the very same snakes, are using the same features, even though there's no house attached to it anymore.
From the beginning, it was obvious to everyone involved that the construction phase of the project could be incredibly disruptive to fox snake habitat, and the risk of accidental mortality was very high. A lot of work was needed to plan this phase if the impacts were to be minimized. Intensive research and extensive training would be necessary before roadwork could begin.
So in the early days, it was really collecting that baseline information in terms of where the snakes are found, their distribution in the city of Windsor, and determining what populations are found where and in what abundance.
We went through twice daily, once in the morning and once at dusk, to salvage as many snakes as we could. We were particularly concerned with Butler's garter snakes and eastern fox snakes, but we grabbed everything that we saw because it was a construction site soon to be.
That sort of transitioned into the construction period to more intensive monitoring, particularly obviously within the construction areas themselves, doing targeted salvages within the construction areas, laying out cover boards, different mechanisms to actually capture these snakes and to relocate them to a safe area outside of the construction site where they wouldn't be impacted. There was the erection of snake fencing all along the entire parkway, wherever there was active construction.
We had some snakes that would manage to get their way back onto the construction site, but through an incredible training procedure whereby thousands of construction workers were trained and sort of educated on the importance of the species and the protocol. If they saw a species, they were to call a hotline.
Well, the hotline, it actually lives right here in my pocket. It's just a cell phone, very simple, and yet every worker on site has this cell phone number right here on their sticker that proves they've had this training, by the way.
If the various snakes and other species were going to be protected on such a large project, everyone involved had to be the extra eyes and ears needed to spot the presence of rare species. All staff, contractors, and subcontractors were trained to identify endangered species, as well as understand the unique environment they were working in. As important as the training was the change in attitudes this produced.
Every person that set foot on Parkway project has had a lesson with myself on the environmental sensitivity of the area and the endangered species that live here that we have to look out for while we're carrying on our work. So far, I've had over 8,000 individuals take that course.
This is new. We got people rolling their eyes and people yawning and people saying, "Why am I here?" After a couple of months, and with our training people that were very passionate and very engaging, we started to get people sitting up and paying attention and taking notes.
It's been absolutely phenomenal to see how that impacts the community on the whole, because people walk away with this training with a little more of an attitude of wanting to help out nature, wanting to look after nature, just a little bit more than they had yesterday, perhaps.
The Parkway was a huge addition to the dense network of roads already in the area. Roads are a barrier to the safe movement of species, creating a patchwork of isolated and vulnerable ecosystems. If the project was going to meet the permit requirements to preserve and enhance critical wildlife habitat, the people tasked with the mitigation efforts would have to think creatively.
There's not a lot of places you go in Windsor where there's not a close network or a dense network of roads. So we also had to determine the impact of those roads, whether it be existing or future, being the Gray Parkway, and how to mitigate those.
One of the ways to mitigate the threat of fragmentation is to link sites together. It's something that it hasn't been enough. There hasn't been enough of that done in the past, in my opinion. I've seen more interest and more awareness of it in the last 10 or 15 years. The Parkway took it to another level with the eco crossing across 401. Huron Church is impenetrable to a snake. Any snake that ever tried to cross Huron Church was 100% going to be run over. There is absolutely no way that it could ever make it across. Well, now there's a big chunk of habitat in the form of a tunnel top that these snakes are using to cross back and forth.
It's an eco passage, a tunnel top that's over 100 meters wide. When you're standing on it, you feel like it's a part of the landscape. So again, I mean, that is a pretty unique mitigation measure or prescription that was implemented for this project that you may not see on a lot of other ones, mainly due to the cost and the magnitude of it all.
So the eco passage, in first and foremost, helps with the gene flow, bringing fresh genes in to species that already live here, and yet they haven't had sampled genes from the other side of Huron Church Road for at least 50 years. It's been at least 50 or 60 years since an animal was able to cross Huron Church Road without getting hit by a car. So, and I've watched many fox snakes get hit by cars. So this eco passage was to help that, to help the gene flow, to help improve the population dynamics, the health of both populations, not just getting them across the road.
So there is a smaller tunnel that was created for Butler's garter snake. It was a pilot eco passage project that was a part of the permit. It was a permit condition. This is a much smaller structure that's constructed beneath the roadbed, very shallow. So it's very easy to construct, even in areas where you do have utilities and other urban influences. So that's really a project component that we would like to see replicated across the landscape, whether it be an NGO group or another municipality, a provincial park, could be anybody really. It's a cost-effective way of mitigating the impacts of roads on these species.
The Parkway project employed a number of innovative techniques and strategies to meet the requirements of both the federal and provincial permits. But that alone would not be enough. The immediate and long-term effectiveness of any actions had to be proven. The only way to do that was to measure the condition of the populations before, during, and after the construction phase. For the snake populations, that meant tagging them.
At T5, we actually have a pit tag reading system that's subterranean. And so that subterranean pit tag reading system literally enables us to document when a pit tag, a microchip bearing animal crosses T5, it sets off the sensor. And a computer logs all that information. And so we've got a scenario where even in our absence, we've got full-time monitoring happening just because a pit tagged animal goes over a sensor.
It's healthy to have these linkages, and hopefully in the future some of these other sites can link together. They're all bisected by roads, and maybe this project will inspire future development of some of these passages. They're certainly not easy to do, and they require effort and they require funding, but the benefits are just enormous.
This eco passage is being used by people, it's being used by fox snakes, it's being used by plants, it's being used by birds, it's being used by the cars that are going underneath it and the cyclists that are going on top of it. It's being used by everybody.
Known as one of the most diverse habitats in Ontario, over 200 rare species have been recorded within the Ojibwe Prairie complex. The project recognized the importance of all these associated species to the healthy functioning of the ecosystem as a whole. Preserving, transplanting, and propagating at-risk species was a huge task that would require new approaches and scientific innovation.
Some of the biggest challenges, I think, to overcome in this project were actually trying to implement it with the amount of material that we needed to install. Also to find very innovative ways in moving those very sensitive species at risk out of the way and put them in a nice, secure restoration area. We not only dug up individual plants, but also took cuttings of the rhizomes and propagated them from that, took seeds, grew them up into seedlings, planted them back into the landscape. And in fact, in some areas where it was just so diverse that we couldn't individually pick out the species we wanted to move, we actually took sod mats right out of the ground with pieces of machinery, cutting huge squares of actual prairie and physically moving it intact into its new home.
If you have an area where there's a lot of rare plants or there's a seed bank with a lot of rare plants present within it, it's a very useful way to bring the seeds, the fungi, the invertebrates that, help these rare species grow. And I think even in propagation, they don't even understand for every species what it takes to get things grow well, right? Like there's a lot of little hidden things we don't understand. So by bringing the sod mats, you're bringing all the ingredients that allowed these rare things to exist in these areas.
Only the highest quality prairie type habitat was moved here that had no invasives in it, because we didn't want to degrade this existing site in any way. And the sod mats were placed in areas that didn't have high quality habitat, so we kind of filled in the gaps.
The movement of sod mats did much to preserve existing prairie plants and their associated species, but by itself, this technique would not be enough. Inevitably, there would be some losses, and even maintaining existing acreage would require a large number of new plantings. New plantings meant collecting and germinating rare plants from seed. For some species, like the colic root, which had never been successfully transplanted or propagated, this would prove particularly challenging.
Most of the seed for prairie and savanna restoration in this province in southern Ontario, it came from here, because this was one of the few areas remaining in southern Ontario, except for maybe Walpole Island, where there's an extensive population and habitat of prairie species to collect seed for further native plant nursery growth. And this is the source.
We worked hard at the nursery, taking a number of steps. First of all, looking at the germinability of the colic root seeds and why people have so many issues with trying to germinate them. We ended up following some of the protocols that were given to us about trying to germinate them. But I kind of took it a little bit outside the box. We played with enough temperatures. We played with enough moisture contents. We played with enough cold and enough warm that suddenly I was successful in getting some seeds to bud. It was phenomenal. Like, I was drop dead excited. I couldn't believe it. And I have not seen the colic root that left our nurseries until today. And I have to tell you this much. It's absolutely amazing. When I walked in here and I saw the colic root, and of course they've stemmed up and they are actually flowering. And when I looked at the overall health of the colic root colony in terms of the basal leaves, that helps define how healthy that plant is, I was blown away. It's absolutely amazing, because as far as I know, this has never been done before.
This particular project is extremely special in that it only used, for the most part, native species in all of its landscaping and restoration. So everything that grows up along that's associated with the parkway is complementary to the existing natural features that it could potentially affect. And what you are actually doing in that aspect is creating additional habitat that's associated with the highway that links all of these areas with all of those native species together. So you're actually increasing the amount of habitat.
The Parkway project didn't just face scientific and technical challenges. The scale of the project meant that the range of stakeholders and participants presented a challenge in itself. Attitudes and agendas varied, adversaries had to work together, and trust was limited. The time, effort, and commitment of everyone was key to the success of the project.
It wasn't easy. It was something that was at times a bit acrimonious, but it worked out all in the best, because everybody's best interests were always held at the forefront. And I think we ultimately came up with a project that is really spectacular in terms of an infrastructure project.
I guess one thing that's unique about this project is the longevity that many people on this project have had. I've been involved for more than 12 years. There's been several people that have been involved since essentially the beginning. So I think that's been a major benefit. You haven't had a lot of people coming and going. I mean, that really helps, because there's a lot of things that we look back on and wonder, could we have done things differently? Or is there something that we did previously that might work in a new situation or a new issue that's arisen? And having those people that have that depth of experience, I think, has really benefited the project as a whole.
We started out in more of an adversarial position. This is a project that was going to go through some pristine prairie habitat. It would be going through some colic root habitats. At that time, there was no successful transplanting technique or propagation technique in place. There was a lot of issues, but over time, we've actually were able to start to slowly trust each other. And like I said, there was some things that we were wanting that we held off on, and we looked at other different opportunities through it. So the continuities is a huge one. That trust that it develops over time, and one of the things that a lot of people, like say from the MTO, would do is they would come out to community events. You know, like we got to know each other. It's just like, you know, I'm proud to say that, you know, I've gotten a lot of friends out of this, because it's just like we spent so much time together. We got to know each other, and they got to know the First Nation.
Establishing good relations with partners and having a consistent and committed team of species experts had other benefits not normally present in large infrastructure projects. As the project evolved, it was able to apply experience gained through adaptive management, community engagement, and scientific research. A lot was learned.
So as you can well imagine, with 15 years of study on these endangered species on this project now, we've got a ton of data. Already, some of that data is being used by students. Students in universities across Ontario are using some of our data.
There is so much to learn from this particular project because the scale was immense. All the different issues that had to be overcome through creative implementation. You can go and consult this particular project for almost anything that you can imagine that is an impact on the natural environment. Even rerouting of local streams, for example, to make sure that the water actually flows underneath the parkway was something that had to be engineered. The restoration of our local drains and watercourses in a fashion that provided fish habitat and natural habitats for aquatic wildlife as well. Fish compensation ponds and stormwater ponds are more like habitat features. There are many different examples that people can see in this particular project that they could locally adapt to their own particular circumstances.
In the beginning, it was very much a species-specific lens that we were looking at things through. We're looking at fox snake. How do we study these fox snake? How do we learn more about them? How do we mitigate the impacts of the project with respect to eastern fox snake? Then we'd look at Butler's garter snake, and we'd go through the same exercise. We'd look at the various plant species at risk. We'd do the same exercise. And as the process went along, it really transitioned more into an ecosystem approach in terms of managing these habitats, protecting these habitats, and encouraging their long-term persistence. So it was an ecosystem approach that really brought all these different components together.
Particular for people who are interested in protecting species at risk, this project has answered a lot of big questions as far as whether you can relocate species and whether they adapt to relocation. It will be used in future projects. There are recommendations in there as to how to carry out such efforts to relocate species.
The Parkway Project is a template for effective planning and species at risk management that can be applied to projects of any size throughout the province. It is also a good example of community and First Nation engagement, ensuring that everyone benefits. Recreationists gain 17 kilometers of multi-use trails connected by bridges and tunnels. Along the Parkway, local citizens and visitors can experience First Nation clan symbols, sculptures, and signage that attest to the culture and history of the region.
So we wanted the people that are using the parkway, this trail here, to actually see these First Nation elements and to kind of start to think and to realize that, you know, this is a very important First Nation Indigenous land. It's been overwhelmingly positive. This is something that we have been talking about for really over 10 years. And it's nice actually to have a project that's completed, that we've actually been able to go through all the different steps and actually get to the finish here.
Truthfully, the people love it. The trails, the network, the accessibility, the infrastructure piece, the road itself is absolutely transformative. The net benefit, particularly to the naturalized areas, is a massive plus for the city of Windsor.
I love the project. I love that it's built this remarkable trail system that people can come and enjoy. My childhood home being turned into snake habitat. It's I can hardly think of a better end to a home. It's a joy to walk these trails and to walk these sites.
It was a real privilege to be able to be part of that and just watch something that was, you know, it was just dense houses, and now it's functional habitat for snakes with hibernacula. It's tall grass prairie again. And it gives you hope that, you know, in the future, if other initiatives have to be done where, you know, we're removing buildings or other things that used to be occupied by people, that things can restore and things, the landscape can be restored, function for wildlife can be restored. And I think really in this day and age with everything going on with the environment and climate change, it's really nice to have positive stories like that.
I was really lucky. I've been involved in other projects which are not so environmental. This is a very positive, feel-good story because the people that were overseeing it, you know, they honestly seem to really care.
They have done a large number of things on this parkway that have never been tried before. And that's what makes this Windsor Parkway so great, is because they're doing things that have never been tried before. And it's a huge, huge learning curve.
This has been a life experience for me. It's been the pinnacle project of my career. And it's been a joy and a proud thing to work on.
So I think this project has been a huge success. All the monitoring data to date suggests that and backs it up. There was actually no negative impact. Everything was moved out of harm's way. Because in the end, if you add it all up, the amount of acreage of rich, diverse, significant natural features, there's much more than we had when we began this project.
We hope you enjoyed the film portion of the evening, and now we're going to move on to the panel. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Facebook comment section or the YouTube chat, and we'll do our best to ask the panelists. So I'm going to bring the panelists in here. And so I just wanted to reintroduce them. So we have Dan Lebedeck, who is the biologist and ecologist at the Essex Region Conservation Authority. Russ Jones, who was the lead field biologist on the Parkway project and now works for IRCA as a conservation areas technician. And Dr. Susan Snyder, a senior plant ecologist at Wood Environment and Infrastructure. So I just wanted to welcome the panelists and say thank you again for joining us. So we do have a few questions, and so I'll start off with this one. How are the transplanted or relocated plants doing today?
They're doing really well, actually. They continue to persist in the habitats we relocated them to off the parkway. We monitor them every year for their health and whether they're flowering and reproducing. What wasn't, I think, talked about in the video was, it is mentioned, the scale of the project was huge, obviously. And we ended up moving more than 150,000 individual plants, either as individuals or in those sod mats. So it was a huge effort. And I am really pleased to say that they've adapted very well to their new homes. And now, even with the completion of the prairie landscape within the Parkway corridor, we're starting to see slowly those SAR plants move into that restored habitat. We already see a lot of natural recolonization of prairie species from those adjacent preserved landscapes. And the landscape had been designed with compatible species for the SAR as well, and also with compatible management. So prescribed burning, for example, into the future. So we are really anticipating that we will see SAR plants move out of those relocated, their relocated homes and back into the landscape adjacent to the highway.
That's awesome. And just kind of a follow-up question, I guess. I may have missed this in the video, but how was colic root able to be successfully germinated in the end?
It was touched on in the video. We had Vic Bernick at Native Trees and Plants do that work. And, he's fantastic. And I would recommend, if you were curious, you could reach out to him. But he tried many different methods for getting those seeds to germinate. And one of the other important things that we learned through his study is that the viability and the germinability of those seeds is actually really high, which makes that particular species, I think, a candidate for growing plugs and augmenting natural populations in the future. But he did it very carefully and with a lot of love and attention, I can assure you.
For sure. It definitely sounds like a challenge. All right, let's move on to snakes. So what are the fox snake numbers before and after the parkway? Steve says that there's lots of data.
I'll answer that. You have to keep in mind that when this project happened, we were sampling largely the footprint of the project, which was adjacent to the entire Ojibwe Prairie complex. So to get an idea of the entire population, that wasn't the focus of our efforts. We were more concerned with the areas immediately adjacent to and on the footprint. We haven't noticed a decline in fox snake numbers at all. In fact, as Dan alluded to in the video, there's been a net gain in habitat. Capture rates are the same. Reproduction rates, in other words, the number of hatchlings that are collected each season haven't changed. There's nothing that indicates that there's been a negative impact on fox snakes or Butler's garter snakes at all. And I attribute that to, again, the creation of all this habitat, but also it's immediately adjacent to their home ranges. They weren't being, a fox snake has a large home range. So any fox snake that was caught on the Parkway project, that was only a very small portion of its home range. So we take it over the exclusion fence and it still has the vast majority of its original home range. So their lives weren't really altered that much because we were just sort of nipping off the very edge of these home ranges. So they're doing fine. The data suggests that there's been no decline. I don't know if there's been a net gain. I haven't looked at that kind of data and I haven't read anything like that. But I do know that there hasn't been a decline in capture rate.
Sorry, I just add another little note further to that is that the studies that we do on all of these species are really scientifically based. And so there are other things through analyses that we're learning that affect population numbers, like temperature and precipitation, that vary on an annual basis. So we don't really look at it like, we can't say for certain that this was the cause, but we've learned a lot about some confounding factors and other things that could play just as important a role as, a disturbance, for example, or more so than a disturbance. And we, as part of the permit conditions, is working on several publications of that information in peer-reviewed journals. So that'll all be, forthcoming in the future.
That's awesome. Wondering if we can talk a bit about the ongoing efforts to monitor the eco passage over the Parkway at Oakwood. So what's going on and what kind of has the preliminary data shown?
Season? I mean, our monitoring is sort of wrapping up now, 5 years post-construction. but the infrastructure is there, and there's lots of animals with pit tags still crawling around, crawling over that strip reader across T5. So that data is still getting collected and stored. And of course, that infrastructure is there for anybody that wants to take on any of the work in the future. I don't know, to be honest. I think most of our monitoring work there is done as of this year or last year.
Yeah, we did wrap up the monitoring. It was the 10th summer of monitoring this past summer. But Russ is right. The infrastructure is there for future use, and snakes are using it.
Awesome. Okay. Of the things learned during the Parkway construction, has anything been applied elsewhere in Ontario that you know of? And if so, what and where?
I could talk to at least one thing. I know that Steve Marks, one of the biologists that did a lot of the fox snake work on the snake team, he's been to Point Pelee and I know other places helping with habitat features such as the imploding the basements and building these hibernation features. And I know he modeled some of that off of what he was doing on the Parkway. So that I am aware of. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Some of the other lessons that we've learned on this, one of the most important ones is that when you undertake a project of this magnitude and you're looking to basically landscape with native plants, planning way ahead and collecting local seed and growing that stock up is extremely important, because nurseries across Southern Ontario just don't carry the quantities and the diversity of the species that you need. So it takes years to plan ahead of time in order to get the material so that when you go to plant, and we did plant hundreds of thousands of species or individuals of not only prairie plants and wildflowers, but also shrubs and trees that are all native to the region. And we tried to ensure that the origin of these plants were local, because we wanted to maintain the genetic complement of the Ojibwe Prairie complex and not get something that was foreign material brought in. So that was very difficult to accomplish. And to have local nurseries learn from this experience and saying there is a demand for locally collected native species stock. We are trying to encourage everybody to try and plant native species, even in their own landscaping at home, because it always does better. And we need to encourage nurseries to actually increase their stock of native species.
Well, I know that a third thing, I know that there's been other projects that have adopted a similar species at risk training that the Parkway did, that they modeled from the Parkway. I have friends that work for other construction companies that have told me, they've even asked me for photographs so that they can use on their packages and on their training. So that is that's something else that I think has been used by others.
I also think the design of the exclusion fencing for the fox snake, it was one, and we also did some studies that the results, we used fox snake, and those results were used to determine permanent mitigation features like wall heights and permanent snake fencing. And I think we have received requests for that information from others as well.
That's great. It sounds like there were so many lessons learned. Was a document created by chance of lessons learned, where I know so many people were working on the project at once, and just wondering if they've had a chance, I know you are all busy, but had a chance to kind of distill really those lessons learned so that people can learn from the Parkway?
I don't think there is a singular document yet. I think, we are required to report and present on all of this mitigation and the results of our monitoring on an annual basis. And that information is shared with MNRF. And so they, I guess, still are really the keepers of a lot of that fine detail at this time.
Gotcha. I hope that it is made public soon, because I think that there's a lot of lessons learned. Let's talk a bit about eco-passages. So what would you say is the most successful eco-passage for Windsor, the overhead bridge or underground tunnel structures?
I would say the overpass is really the ideal solution, because it takes into consideration everything from the species at risk that we're really trying to help out, but I mean every butterfly and every pollinating insect and plants, vegetation, birds nesting. I've done bird surveys right on top of the tunnel tops, and grassland birds, sparrows, bluebirds, all these different species are using it. So it's just, there's nothing better than that sort of an eco crossing. The tunnel is much more focused on an animal that can use it, like a small animal. A deer certainly isn't going to use it, or so you're looking at small rodents, snakes, amphibians, things like that. So just for just an ecologically bang for your buck, also at an exponentially more expensive cost, you're not going to beat the tunnel top with just a contiguous habitat right over the roadway.
No, I totally agree with that too. And over time, as succession takes place and populations grow and seeds spread, just like all of the landscaping along the Parkway road edge, the tunnel top as well connects the genetic flow from the various plant populations in the natural features on either side together and blends them all together, so that it becomes seamless and it benefits all species that live here, not just animals.
Yeah, that's for sure. That the connectivity isn't just about animals; it's for plants too.
So, we're back. So, let me just ask. There's another question with regards to the snake translocations and their publication in peer-reviewed journals. And so I'm just wondering, is there any plans for that? And if so, who's taking the lead on that?
Yes, they are in progress, and our lead snake biologist, herpetologist, her name is Megan Hazel, and she's the lead on that, and she's working with Queens, I believe. So she does have collaborators, university collaborators as well. And as you saw from the video, there are a lot of people involved in the success of this work. So there'll be, many other people involved in the publication too, but she's the lead responsible for the publication. And honestly, there's at least there's a lot that we're looking at. So it'll be really exciting to have that out there.
For sure. I look forward to reading and learning more about it. Definitely. Question, were there other animal species at risk that are doing well? So we talked a lot about snakes and plants, but are there other animals that are also benefiting from this project?
I would like to talk about that really quickly. We had our species at risk that were on the permit that were pre-identified and that we had to mitigate for. And then on the video, it was mentioned about the stormwater. Dan actually talked about the stormwater management ponds and the fish compensation ponds. And in those ponds, we documented softshell turtles and Blanding's turtles and map turtles and all these species at risk turtles that were the habitat simply wasn't even there prior to the project. So it's no wonder they didn't turn up. But now with the addition of all these ponds, certainly they have, they've just appeared. They've made their own way there through the drainage systems and whatnot. But now they have suitable habitat to stick around, and hopefully there's some good, areas for them to nest in. It's a nice sandy soil around there. So yeah, I see all these species benefiting, and that's just the turtle life. Of course, anytime you are managing for grasslands, you're doing a favor to any grassland loving birds. Grasslands are tough.
it's labor intensive to keep them grasslands. They always want to succeed into a thicket and into a forest. So as long as there's management happening on the landscape, you're always going to help some of the rarest, because grassland species are imperiled everywhere. And yeah, that's going to help everything from grassland birds to the snakes to the insects, and there's other plants that aren't listed, like provincially rare S1, S2, S3 species. Our work and our presence is going to help an abundance of species. Absolutely.
I'll just say further to that about the plants, is that we've really actively managed about 25 hectares or so of prairie adjacent to the parkway that was preserved, where our SAR plants were relocated. And since we've had our eyes on the ground and have been, monitoring and managing those habitats, we've discovered an additional species at risk. We had another permit for the Eastern Prairie Fringed Orchid. That population has increased tenfold since we started monitoring and managing it. We have got over 45 provincially rare species identified in just these areas along the parkway. So really, really significant. This habitat that's adjacent to this, to the Parkway project is truly rare and significant to the province, to the cultural history in the province.
Absolutely. No, that sounds great. A question for you, Dan. Could you discuss how the provincial government's recent changes to the Conservation Authorities Act might impact IRCA's continued involvement in this type of project?
And for those of you who don't know what the changes are, it's a focus on ensuring that how conservation authorities are funded through local levy, what that money can be allocated to, and the programs that we do. We are trying the changes in the Conservation Authorities Act are trying to ensure that there's a definition between core programs and non-core programs, and that local levy can be used for only core programs. So a core program would be IRCA taking care of its own conservation areas and managing them appropriately and doing restoration, and studying and doing our job in being great stewards of the natural environment. But we can transfer that knowledge to projects like this. It just may mean that we don't get to use in our budgetary balance sheet local levy taxpayer money unless the local municipalities actually agree that that's what they want to pay us to do. So that it's just changes in how things are financed at the Conservation Authority.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Just a personal question, is there anything that surprised you as a result of this project where you were like, that won't happen or whatever, and it did? Or is there anything where you were like, I wasn't expecting that, but it did happen?
One of the things that kept coming up in the landscaping especially is that you have to imagine that this P3 contract that MTO got into was based upon reaching some milestones. And those milestones were pretty clear cut. You had to reach this level of achievement by this particular date, and you had to have this amount of success at this date. But in the end, what we were actually trying to do in the landscaping was create tallgrass prairie. So when you went out and assessed the success of planting and getting tallgrass prairie to come up in the landscape, many of the landscapers and the people who were trying to push the MTO to meet these targets were very disappointed in saying that the number of plants we're seeing that are supposed to be tallgrass prairie are just not appearing there. And I kept saying, please be patient. Tallgrass prairie will come along. It'll take a few years to germinate under the right circumstances, but once it germinates, it'll be there and it will thrive. And in many cases, they were just, that didn't meet their target. So it was a surprise they were trying to push an ecological principle of growing native prairie into such confined timelines that it just wasn't practical. But in the end, we found that it was a supreme success. And we didn't really have to redo some of the areas that they actually did over because of the disappointment in the number of prairie species that popped up. They eventually did germinate and pop up quite well and fill in. It just took some time, and it took the right moisture conditions and heat conditions over several years to get all of those seeds to germinate properly, and then they all came. But I didn't have any doubt that it would come along, but there were others that did, and I just kept encouraging them. Just be patient, and sure enough.
One of the things that I found interesting that I never really thought about until this project, and anybody that's worked on a long-term project like this might relate, is and you get an animal like a Butler's garter snake, it's lucky if it lives 5 years. You know, I think we had one that was a 6-year-old, which was, I mean, that is an old man. That's an old snake for a Butler's garter snake. So when we started this project, none of the snakes were the same snakes by the time we finished the project. It was like not a single individual was the same snake. An entire new, generation had passed. And for me, I mean, it's not hard to think about that because, you know, their lifespan, but you don't really consider it until you're in a long-term study like this. But it also sort of made me realize how fragile these things are. It takes just a few bad years and you can really knock their numbers down. It's such a short-lived animal. And yeah, that's something that always struck me as interesting, is that, you know, just none of the snakes to start with were there at the end.
Yeah, no, that's great. Something you don't really consider, for sure. So, Russ, I wanted to talk to you about the fate of your childhood home. I know that my childhood home is now the Parkway is its front yard, essentially across the street. We lived with some snake fencing for a little while in my childhood home, and I'm wondering if you can just speak to what happened to yours.
Yeah, it was right on Redox, which was highlighted in the video. I moved to Canada in 1986. I was born and spent most of my childhood in England. And that was the first home that we lived in when we moved to Canada. And we lived there for several years. And, the Spring Garden natural area was my playground, my backyard. And the very house that I, spent my childhood in was bulldozed, and it was turned into a snake hibernacula. I mean, it's a snake den. That's what it is. And I've been lucky, even working with IRCA now, part of my job is revisiting these exact sites and walking on that exact property and cutting invasive species off of it, and being involved in prescribed burns and things like that. So it's, I mean, how many people can say that, but how many snake biologists can say that my house was turned into a snake den? Legit.
That's awesome. Perfect fate for a childhood home if it has to be demolished, I would say. So
yeah,
I
wasn't sad about it.
Yeah, no kidding. So recognizing that we're close to 7 o'clock, I just wanted to end off with this one question, and was wondering what each of your favorite parts was of working on the Parkway project. I don't know if Dan, you want to start?
Sure. I think you could see the emotion in a lot of the people that were in that video talking about being the pinnacle of their career. And certainly that sums it up for most of us who worked on the Parkway. It was such a long project. It had so many thousands of people involved, thousands of people helping to build this huge infrastructure project from all different professional fields, and some of the most brilliant professionals of biologists, ecologists, fauna biologists, and engineers, landscapers. It was an extreme pleasure just to be involved with that level of detail and knowledge sharing. It's not as if all the experts came together in this project and knew exactly what to do. It was, we're going to bring a bunch of professionals together and we're going to figure out how to do this as we go along and what works and what doesn't. And that was the most educational experience I have ever had in my professional career, in interacting with biologists like Season and Russ and Steve Marks and everybody from all the different consulting firms, the local naturalist groups, First Nations, and bringing all that knowledge together. It was an extremely beneficial educational experience for me, and I will never forget it.
No, that's awesome. It's similar to the DRCC's work and having all these partners and trying to go towards one goal. And the scale at which the Parkway project was done was very impressive. So Susan, what about you?
I think Dan said that beautifully. I agree. The collaboration on the project was extremely rewarding. And for me, what stands out, I guess in particular, is the work that we did with the Walpole Island First Nation. They were amazing. They moved like every single stem. They, on their hands and knees, dug up to remove rhizomes of willow leaf aster. They drove the bobcat that picked up the 800-pound sod mats and relocated them. And they taught us a lot about the importance of those plants to them culturally and traditionally. And that was really amazing. So that was really special to me personally, having that experience with them.
Awesome. And finally, Russ, anything to add?
I'll echo, of course, both of those. You can't beat the people and the team, but just to offer something else. I've done a lot of work with snakes and a lot of endangered species work even prior to this project, and it's always been pretty heartbreaking. And it's always bad. Like construction wasn't done very gently, and it's just been discouraging. And I kind of didn't have a lot of hope for species at risk in southwestern Ontario, and being on this project has it's sort of rejuvenated my faith that these things can be done in a compassionate way. It was just a different culture. It was a different way of doing things. I never thought I'd see anything like it, and then not only did I get to see it, I got to be a part of it. And I would say, really, yeah, it renewed my faith in that there is a system that can work and there is a way to do things. And it's not the easiest way. It's not, it does take a little extra effort, but it can be done if the will is there to do it. And it was there on this project. And I'll take that, I'll take that with me till my time's done. It was just beautiful to be a part of that.
Yeah, for sure. We're getting a lot of comments, and unfortunately we weren't able to get to all of them, but we'll take a note of them and respond, hopefully by email to some of you with your questions for sure. So with that, I just wanted to provide some closing comments. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to come to our film screening. We really hoped you enjoyed it, and wanted to thank the panelists again, and to everyone who made this day possible. And as a token of our appreciation, we planted a tree for each of our panelists through the Essex Region Conservation Foundation. And so this tree will enhance our natural community by contributing to the greening of our regions for generations to come. So thank you very much. And as a reminder,
thank you.
I just wanted to let you know that if you're wondering what the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup is up to, check out our website at detroitriver.ca, and you can also register for our monthly newsletter on our website. And so for more information on the Parkway project, you can visit hgparkway.com. And so just a note about that, there was a recent domain change, so just make sure to use .com, and you'll be directed with to more information about the Parkway. And so if you have any feedback about the film that you would like us to pass along to the production team, please put it in the comments or email it to us at postmaster@detroitriver.ca. And with that, I just wanted to say have a great night. And again, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.